Welcome back to another episode of Culinary Connections Distribution Dialogues, where we dish it out with culinary professionals in the distribution business, give you an insider look on sales and marketing and how people have evolved in their businesses. And today we've got Joe Lasprogata of Samuels and Son Seafood out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I've got to say, Joe, when it comes to seafood distribution, I'm a big college football guy, and so I look at college football rankings, and I kind of look at the same thing. And the ranking of food distribution, and Samuel certainly comes in the top five in my list of distributors in the country. The integrity, the loyalty your company has within the industry, and certainly from a vendor standpoint, everyone wants to work with the Samuel. So a company that's been around for over 100 years is doing something right. Would you mind kind of giving us a little background on the company and how it started and where it is today?
Sure. First of all, Ian, thank you very much for inviting me on your show. I appreciate the opportunity, and it's nice to have opportunity to have a conversation with you about, the business and how we've got here, and hopefully we'll get into where I see things going into the future. So the company's been around for a long time, as you mentioned. Originally, it was. The real roots of the company are a gentleman by the name of Giuseppe Ippolito, who actually had a push cart and had fish down on Delaware Avenue in Philadelphia. And then from that, it evolved into a retail store in the South Philadelphia in 1929. And then in 1989, Sam D'Angelo, the grandson of the original owner, opened up in the food distribution center in Philadelphia at the time. And he started with one truck and a couple of guys on the dock. And he had the vision of developing a seafood distribution company in Philadelphia, primarily initially not only to service his own store, but to distribute to the restaurants that were in the area in that time. And it was limited. As you know, Philadelphia really evolved into a restaurant hub over the last 30 years. And we have some of the finest restaurants in the world. And that was kind of the start of it as the chefs started to matriculate into the city from different areas around the country. And it was our job at the time, and my job specifically, to accommodate them with the fish that they were used to buying from wherever they came from. So and then my background at the time, I had come from the Gulf of Mexico, and that's just at the time that the fresh tuna industry had started in the United States. And I was down running between Key West and Brownsville, Texas, buying longline tuna and shipping it around the world 5 years prior to me arriving in 1989. So at that time, I moved back to Philadelphia. I'm originally from Philadelphia. And I didn't really know anything about food distribution, but I did know fish. And I had made a lot of great contacts in the Gulf of Mexico over the 5 years that I was down there. And I moved to Philadelphia. I was the only buyer. Sammy was doing the sales and the frozen buying. I was buying all the fresh fish. So I started bringing, things like American red snapper, pompano, and of course, fresh tuna into Philadelphia. And at the time, it was primarily swordfish, scallops, crab meat, things that you would find regionally from Cape May and Maryland and up through New England. So that was 34 years ago.
Wow.
And then, as they say, the rest is history as the company developed. And Sammy's vision certainly expanded into over 100 trucks in Philadelphia and 3 other locations, Las Vegas, Orlando, and Pittsburgh.
That's amazing. Well, we get to hear a lot of stories of founders that started with one truck and a vision, and to see things where they are now. Your history in particular, you talked about being from Key West to Brownsville, sourcing longline tuna. Talk a little bit about your history with marine biology.
Well, seems like lifetime ago, and I guess it was at this point. But I had always had a passion for the ocean. I'd spent my summers down in Ocean City, New Jersey. A lot of people were surfing and things like that, and I was crawling around the jetties and pulling crabs and fishing and doing fun things like that. So I always had a passion for the sea and the ocean and seafood. I always enjoyed that, and that that translated into my choice of uh, as far as moving forward as the curriculum I chose in school. It was marine biology, and I ended up at Long Island University at Southampton, and that odd way is how I first got into the seafood industry specifically. I had during the summers I had gotten my captain's license during college, and I was running some sport boats, and I ended up in Montauk. And then actually my lacrosse coach introduced me to a gentleman that was buying tuna in Montauk, and that was my first job. I was buying tuna in Montauk, and then we were exporting them to Japan at the time. But the tunas that weren't of quality to be sent to the Skiji market, we were selling domestically, and that was just about the same time. This is the early 80s when the sushi bars started to open up in the U.S. and the most of the sushi bars were between New York and, of course, Los Angeles, and that's where we primarily airshipped it. And that's where air freight kind of started too, which is commonplace now for seafood. But at the time, the fresh tuna business, we were shipping, to California, and of course, just driving into the Fulton Market in New York.
Tuna is a difficult category for a seafood distributor because it's a very subjective eye. I mean, sure, you can look at fattiness and color, but every restaurant's going to have their own version of what a number one is. Did you see that at the same time, when you were in the early 80s? I mean, were people picky about, a number one at that point?
Surprisingly enough, now you're correct. It's very subjective. But you got to remember, I was a 22-year-old kid coming out of college, and my first challenge wasn't the chefs, which were, of course, always challenging, but I had to convince the tuna boat captains, in Biola Battery, Alabama, that fish was a number two, not a number one. And at the time, that was a dollar a pound difference. The interesting thing when I moved back to Philadelphia, I'm from Philadelphia originally, and and I still, of course, because that was my specialty at the time, was bringing in the fresh yellowfin tuna out of the Gulf. People in Philadelphia, in New York, and even up into Boston, thought a tuna fish was actually brown. That they weren't experienced enough at that time to know that the tuna fish is supposed to be red. And some of the first fish that we cut, I would bring in nice number twos, bright red fish, very fresh. People weren't used to it, and they actually thought there was something wrong with the fish when we sold it to them initially, and we had to educate them right out of the gate. And then even the chefs at the time, if I would be very excited to bring in a number one big eye that had A quality fat, and a lot of the chefs would send it back because they thought there was something wrong with the fish because it was cloudy, and they didn't understand that it was a top quality fish. They just didn't know it, and we spent a lot of time educating the chefs and about tuna and about a lot of other species because, as I mentioned, they just weren't used to it in the region.
And now, I'm sure your tuna cutters or your fish cutters are pretty experienced at knowing like what the quality of each restaurant is expected, especially when it comes to tuna, right? Like I know that this particular restaurant wants this type. Do you handle returns similarly, right? When you get that message that X restaurant kicked a whole loin of number one, what is that experience like with a customer? Are you calling them and saying, hey, we know your spec, it's pretty, this aligns with it. How do you handle that objection?
Well, the customer always comes first, right? Customer's never wrong, even when they are wrong. So we try to minimize that, and our sales staff spends a lot of time with our customer, uh, dialing in exactly what that customer expects out of the fish. So we try to take that knowledge and share it with our cutters. The facility we have now, we have an ample space, and we're very fortunate to have a very large tuna cutting room. So we're allowed to. We have the capability of laying the loins out. We can inspect the loins, make sure that the quality is that, of course, of the customer, to make sure that it's our quality to begin with when it comes in the door. We spend a lot of time with our tuna suppliers to make sure that they understand our parameters. Not everybody's, sends tuna to Samuel's. We're very selective about our vendors. They go through an extensive process to be verified that the product is coming from the right fishery, that the business, that the business itself is wholesome enough that we want to do business with them. Of course, in this day and age, with so much in the news about IUU fishing and the conditions under which these fishermen are subject to, we spend a lot of time going through that first to make sure not only the product's right, but the business that we're buying from is on the up and up as well.
How's food safety changed from when you really got into the business to today? I mean, there's a lot of regulation and obviously scrutiny in the news that we see about seafood industry for sure. But what are some noticeable things that you've seen put in place specifically at Samuel's?
Well, we've always been concerned about food safety and food quality. We have, state-of-the-art facility to make sure that the refrigeration is up to par, and that when we have that product in-house and it's under our jurisdiction, we make sure that it's taken care of properly and at the proper temperature, because temperature is key, especially when you're dealing with products that are not only they're going to go through another step. They're going to go through the cooking step, but a lot of our product is eaten raw, so it's twice as important to make sure that the product's kept in the right way. Back in the early '90s, when HACCP was just coming into play, that was all about procedure and process, and that was kind of new at the time, and that took a little bit of time for the whole industry to acclimate to. But when that did happen, and the local state inspectors would come in, it certainly improved the quality of the product, because no longer was it the wild, wild west, and you could pick crab meat in your garage and hope it was good. Things had to be documented, temperatures had to be maintained, times had to be kept, and that was a great advancement. And you saw the quality of the seafood products go up. And also the demand went up as well as the restaurant industry expanded, and that's really when you saw a lot of growth in the industry. Recently, we're dealing with new regulations. The FDA, FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, Section 204 was just put on the books, which will come into play and be enforced starting January 20th of 2026. And what that means is that basically every seafood product that we handle, fin fish, all the way through, is now considered a high-risk item. So the FDA is going to require full traceability from the beach to the plate and back again for every product that we handle. So now we're acclimating to that. We're upgrading our computer system to make sure we can handle that. It gets kind of interesting because we have over 5,000 SKUs, both fresh, frozen, and pasteurized, and we're going to have to track everything individually, just like we have to do shellfish now.
So same thought from a shellfish tagging is going to be incorporated in the finfish with the new legislation.
Correct, everything.
And even at the restaurant level, is that right?
That's correct. We're going to have to, well, our vendors are going to be required to send us all the lot traceability numbers for each item on every invoice. So if there's multiple items on an invoice, each item will have a lot traceability number that will accompany that product all the way through the system down to the restaurant level. And the restaurants will be required to maintain that information for 2 years, just like we'll be able to have to maintain that information all the way through. So what's going to happen is much like with the shellfish tags, um, us as a wholesale distributor, we're the ultimate middleman, right? So we're going to be the directors of all this information, because when the restaurant doesn't have it, who are they going to come to? Just like the shellfish tags. And then if the vendors don't have the right information and they're not sending it through, who has to police them? It's going to be us as well to make sure that our documentation is in order. Uh, so when the inspectors come, we can provide that
It
information
seems
that
like a
they
messy
require.
situation, because I think you and I both know how sometimes unsophisticated some of these restaurants can be, right? When you're making a drop at 10 in the morning at a dinner only spot, I mean, there's a high likelihood that it could be the dishwasher that's checking in the order, right? And just putting in the cooler. And,
Mm-hmm.
are they instructed to take, what does that procedure look like? It seems like it could get messy.
I think you're absolutely right. As many restaurants as there are, there's could be that many different procedures, because the FDA is really not providing any guidance or resources on how to do it. They're just saying, this is what we need you to do, and we're going to hold you accountable. And they expect the industry to figure it out on their own. The problem is that the FDA doesn't really understand how the restaurant industry works, and they sure don't understand how wholesale seafood works. Being that 85% of the products that we sell are imported and come from overseas. So you can imagine how many different types of systems, it's literally the Tower of Babel as far as accessing this information, because everybody's going to have different systems. And right now, for the most part, everybody does a good job, and they share that information. But if there's 10 different companies that we buy from, they may have 10 different systems. So now it's up to the industry to try to create uh, a policy of interoperability for these data systems. So we're in the seafood industry. We're not computer geniuses. Although I'm learning a lot about computers now. I mean, I know what I need the systems to do. I don't know how to code or any of that. So now we've hired, we have a half a dozen people. That's all they're working on now, is a new system that allows us not only to receive the product, bring it in, inventory it, process it, and then once we process it, as I mentioned before, these traceability lot numbers are associated with a product, but now each product becomes an ingredient and it runs into our cutting room. Once it goes into the cutting room, it becomes an ingredient, but then there could be commingling. So we have to have a scannable label that allows us to record the different products, the different lots that come in to create the new lots. And of course, we have to record all that, create new tags, new lot numbers, and then share that with our customers. So it's a little bit, even though it's very simple on the surface, it's very complicated, because if we were making chocolate chip cookies and we were doing 1,000-pound batches one at a time, it could move through very cleanly, right? It comes in as a whole fish and goes out as 8-ounce portions, and we could put a new lot number on it. But that's not how seafood works, and that's not how the restaurant industry works. We cut to order, so we're doing fractionated lots. Out of that 1,000 pounds, we may be pulling 100 pounds off for one order and creating 8-ounce portions. And the next 100-pound comes off, that might be a 4-ounce portion for a customer. So that's a different lot number. So we have to have the capability of tracking that, and it all becomes a labeling system.
Yeah, not only that, but when you think about red snapper, you could have 40 pounds of red snapper from Tuesday delivery left, and your new lot's coming in on Thursday, and there's another 60 pounds. Customers ordering 100 pounds, so they're going to get a mixed lot of what that item is. And having seen the produce world and the meat world, and I was listening to a podcast you did a long time ago, but it struck me as something that I think a lot of people have to recognize. The seafood industry sources so much wild product, right? Imagine going in just like Nebraska and going to get wild cattle. That doesn't happen, right? The seafood industry does source wild mahi mahi, and there's shortages, and it's totally different than farmed. How have
Right.
you seen the supply chain change in over the years, like the farm seafood versus wild seafood?
Well, you're absolutely right. Once it was once said we're the last of the buffalo hunters because there is no other wild product sourced, right? There's no wild chickens, there's no wild cabbage. Everything else comes from a farm. But I think what you're leading into, although it's really starting to fade a little bit, it's not like it used to be. People would just get so turned off by if they heard that that was a farm raised fish, not because they thought that anything was actually wrong with it, because people eat farm raised fish every day. In fact, nearly 65-70% of the products that we sell are now a product of aquaculture. Aquaculture is a fabulous thing, especially for the restaurant industry, especially for the environment. We can't continue to, harvest at the levels that are required for the world's population from the wild stocks. We need to rely on aquaculture if we're going to be able to provide high quality proteins to our restaurants and to people if they want the variety. It's just not fair to the environment, basically, to continue to hammer uh, the wild species in the wild environment. There's just too many people in the world. And quite frankly, aquaculture is a fabulous thing. It's amazing just the variety of species that are available now, and the quality and the reliability. It stabilizes the prices because we know what availability there is. We don't have these wild swings. If a caterer or a food service was trying to plan an event 6 months out, years ago, you'd never know what the price was going to be. It was tough to price that out. So now you kind of know there's a pretty tight window of what the prices are going to be. So it allows the rest of the industry to do business because of the stabilization of the prices. And also, the availability is there, so it expands their menu choices. So it makes it better. But, it always, everybody knows that Atlantic salmon is an aquacultured species, and it's been around since, one of the first products that's been available. But a lot of people don't realize that bronzino is a product of aquaculture. Everybody thinks it's wild, and the hamachi and so many other different species are available now that it really does facilitate menus, for a year-round basis.
Well, I think it's lack of education by a lot of people on how food actually gets to the table, whether that's seafood. Nobody wants to. There's no beautiful way to slaughter an animal. There's just not. I've been into slaughterhouses on the pork side, on the beef side, and poultry. I've seen it in seafood, and the reality is that we've got to feed the world, and there's a certain way to do it. And aquaculture is a great way. There's mortality rate that gets brought up, but for these businesses, they're investing millions and millions of dollars to know what the water temperature is, what the pH is, what the feed is, right? What the environment is. And, they've really, I'm sure you've been to aquaculture farms. I've been, and it's fascinating to see the computer screens and seeing the fishes, rolling around. I mean, they've got it very dialed in now to where, we're able to have, to your point, consistent pricing, consistent quality. The food safety is
Mm-hmm.
there. So I think there is a, maybe less negative stigma today, but it still exists a little.
Yeah, and a little bit of that stigma is part of the reason that it's such a successful, efficient, clean, uh, low carbon footprint uh, process as it is today. It's amazing. And there are success stories after success stories. I mean, you look at shellfish and oysters and how they've made a rebound. Aquacultured oysters are amazing. They're on every menu. They're high quality. People are eating oysters now that would never even think of eating oysters before. And they're safe and they're tasty and they're available and very user friendly. Um, the black mussel too. It's coming out of PEI out of Prince Edward Island. It's amazing. It's on every menu and it's inexpensive. And who doesn't like mussels marinara? I'm sure you're even getting it on a regular basis. I know Seattle Fish does a great job out in your neck of the woods.
They do.
Even though Derek is recently retired, shout out to him. He did a great job there, bringing that company up to speed.
I'll make sure he gets a recording of this.
He's a good guy. We're going to miss him, but I have a feeling he's not going very far. He's I've always looked up to that company. It's a good company. But you have mussels in the middle of the country, which is amazing. And 20 years ago, they would have been a frozen product, and the quality would it's. I'm not going to say it would be bad, but it's certainly not what it is today, where you still have a live product and available on a daily basis.
Sidebar on that, I love to eat out and I love to cook. Do you find yourself in your friend circle? Are they intimidated to be in your presence at a restaurant or when you go over to their house for dinner?
Um, Not at all, because a lot of times we have conversations just like this, because I enjoy seafood and I like sharing what I know. And one of my favorite thing to do is introduce people to oysters, because a lot of people are fascinated by them, but they've never tried them before. So I'd like to do what I say is my huckleberry fin on them. So I'll bring a couple dozen oysters or a box of oysters, and I'll start opening them. I'll set up. I'll get the cutting board out, some towels, a couple different knives, and I'll start opening a few and setting them out. And I'll have a vignette sauce and some lemons. And then people say, "Oh, I've never had an oyster." Well, they're eating oysters all of a sudden. Then there's always that one guy that comes along, or gal, who says, "How do you open up an oyster?" I said, "Oh, it's easy." So guarantee within one dozen oyster, I got them all set up, and I have somebody else opening them for me, so I can go have a glass of wine and enjoy a few oysters too, because it's not that hard and they're very user friendly.
That's a good point. I'll have to do that. Talking about sustainability further, what do you guys at Samuels do to take that really to heart and to educate the staff and your customers?
Well, sustainability is probably one of my least favorite words, and not for the reason that you think. It's very important to me with my background, but the problem is that word is so overused, and a lot of people really don't understand what it means. It's become a buzzword. I mean, you see it everywhere, and nobody really takes the time to understand it. What I try to do, and I share with my sales staff on a regular basis, and hopefully they share it with our customers, is remove the word sustainable and replace it with responsibly harvested products. Because people think that sustainability is about the fish, and it's really not the fish, it's about the fishery. And that's where you get into, whether it's produced as the wild product is produced, or if it's produced via aquaculture. Either way, how is it produced? What is the impact on the environment? What is the impact on the indigenous species? All these things are important. So, as vice president, as a former director of purchasing, we would check out the businesses to make sure that they shared the same opinion that we did and were doing things the right way. A lot of these NGOs and these organizations that verify, they're good, but you really have to understand them as well. You can't, in this day and age, you can't take. I'm not saying don't use them as a tool, but you can't take their word for it. You have to go and check it yourself. And we spend a lot of time, with the internet these days, information is readily available. You can really investigate these different producers, even if they're halfway around the world. And then, of course, since we've been in the industry for so long, it's seafood industry is a very small industry, and I'm sure you've been to Boston. Everybody knows everybody, so
It's like
there.
a family reunion.
Yeah. So if you want to find out about somebody, it's only it's not 6 degrees of separation. It might be 2 degrees of
Right.
separation, and you can find out.
Yeah.
And most of the time, if somebody's doing things the wrong way, it doesn't take long. It'll find you. So we'll stay away from those people. And we reward people that do things the right way by sharing the way they do business with our customers and encouraging them.
So you're speaking at a sustainability summit at Virginia Tech here in, I believe it's Virginia Tech in a
Yeah,
month.
their seafood resource center that they share with the state of Virginia. It started out as a little summit, and it's pretty interesting. I was talking to Dr. Schwartz, and they were kind enough to and getting back to our. It all started with a conversation about our traceability data system, and then it expanded in. We were going to have like a very small summit with some of the players that I had known along my journey of trying to create this and understand it. And it's turned into a little bit of a thing now. I expect a couple hundred people, and we will be discussing upcoming Section 204 and how it's going to impact at all levels of the industry. Not only us as a distributor, but also, how all these new data system companies are now evolving, looking at traceability in new ways and the complexities of it. We work very closely with a company called Blue Trace, and the reason they're important is a very simple reason. We discussed how much products coming in, and it's coming in from all these different places. Similar products. You mentioned mahi. Well, there might be 5 different shippers of mahi that comes in on a Thursday. Well, when that product and that comes in on a truck and it backs up to our door and it's unloaded at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's in the cutting room. So if that product's not identified immediately before it gets there, we have no chance. There's hundreds of boxes that come in, and there's no way we could separate everything, label it. So it has to be labeled before it gets there. So this company has provided a labeling system and a printer system for our vendors at a very inexpensive price, so that the product can be digitally labeled before it gets to our facility, so we can just scan it and move it through and facilitate the data that needs to be recorded. So things like these new, and it's not a new concept, but it's new for the seafood industry because it's a very ancient business. And I like to say it's the second oldest business on the planet. But selling fish, supply and demand. But if the labeling is not in place and accurate before it gets to my facility, it would be very difficult for us to do business, and we would be suffocated. So little things like that are important, and that's what we're
Yeah,
going to discuss in Virginia.
I got a chance to meet Chip in the fall. Really cool technology, and for anyone in seafood that currently has people handwriting the oyster tag or shellfish tags, this actually eliminates the double work, right? Going from paper to the computer, everything is done digitally, so it saves you a lot of time, gives you way more visibility to the lots and dates that you're using. When you think about when you started, how has Samuel's changed as a company and in what you're offering chefs today? Has it changed, or is it still at its core we're primary seafood and that's what we do?
We're primary seafood, and that's what we do, and we do it 24/7. How has it changed? The one disappointing thing I'll say that it's changed is in the old days when we were on the mark in the we were on the open, it was an open air market in Philadelphia, and there was 20 different fish companies all in a row, much like Fulton used to be in Fulton Street in New York. And Jessup's still like that a little bit, where we were side by side. And the chefs used to come down, not the sous chefs, not the dishwashers, not some guy in the back. The chefs would come down and pick out their fish for the serving for that night, or for a couple of days, and actually pick out the fish, and they would speak to me and understand the physiology of the fish and where it was caught and how the feed changes the flavor profile at different times of the year or when it's best. And they actually learned about the fish, and more importantly, respected the fish that was going to be served in their restaurant that night. I think that's been lost, just like in a lot of different industries. It's more about profit and loss, and especially when we went through COVID, we became so disassociated with one another. And I don't think that story is told so much about the products that are being sold, because I'm not having this conversation with the chef. And I think the fish loses its identity a little bit, and it's a shame, because the story is a major part of the value of the product. And you get a little bit of that back with the oysters when you start talking about the terroir and where they're harvested and all that sort of thing. But, to have the chef take that fish back and actually butcher it and understand the physiology and the muscle structure and how it lends itself to different dishes, I think that may have been lost a little bit. Now we just send out, 30 pieces of Chilean sea bass already cut in 8-ounce squares on a bias, and it just goes out, just the volume. So I
Do
think
you think
that's
you're
a shame.
selling, proportionally? Do you sell more whole fish, or do you have a
No,
vast majority?
nobody takes whole fish anymore. Most of the sushi restaurants, they're taking it one at a time. They prefer to butcher the fish themselves, but for the most part, everything goes out processed or fillet. And to tell you the truth, we created that. Our cutters are so skilled, and we create value for the product that, labor is tough in kitchens to get somebody to actually know. I mean, there's not too many people that can butterfly a bronzino, especially if they have to do 500 pieces of that, right? They just don't have the capability. And we do that for them, right? So that's what we do, and that's our business. So it's sort of a, catch
It's always
22.
fun having a warehouse tour with the chef and their culinary team coming in and getting to see the cutters, and they're just kind of blown away because, you have this perception of, I went to culinary school and I can cut up a fish, and then you see how quickly they do it, and the yield is tremendous. Like, oh,
Correct.
oh wow, okay, that's
I mean,
totally
even
different.
you think everybody thinks that a farm raised Atlantic salmon is so mundane, but that's one of the hardest fish to cut. And our guys can cut them and take a side off in 3 cuts, and it's amazing what they can do in the yields. And they'll stand there for 8 hours just cutting fish, and they'll do thousands of pounds, and they'll never complain. And this business, and that's what it comes down to. You still have to cut fish by hand. Because of the variety, we any given day, just in the fresh fish, not discussing the freezer or the other product, but we could have 200 different types of fresh fish a day, and there's nobody that would have. There's no machine in the world that can cut that, right? You would need a football field of machines, because each machine would be specific. So everything is cut by hand still, and we even pin bone by hand, because the chefs prefer not to have the gaping, and sometimes you have that problem with the salmonoids, and some of the whitefish just don't go through a machine pin boner, so it's all still done by hand, one at a time.
You guys use ozonated water. I think that's a unique selling feature
Mm-hmm.
from a company standpoint. It just, I think it helps the integrity of the fish personally. Obviously you guys like it. What are some of the benefits that you've seen customers like it for?
When we moved into the new facility, we installed the ozoniated water. We're on our 5th generation machine now. And it's a great way to minimize, you know, it to minimize any type of bacteria that travels in with the fish because they're still coming in from boats a lot of times. So it allows us to it oxidizes any type of unwanted proteins or bacteria that may travel in with the fish. It keeps it cleans, it breaks down the proteins. So it not only gets rid of any unwanted bacteria, but it also helps keep the cutting room itself clean so we can minimize the amount of detergents that we have to use as well. We still have to do a deep clean a couple times a week, of course, but it keeps things clean as we're in production.
Yeah,
And
whenever I would bring people into the seafood room, one of the things that they would mention is like, it doesn't smell like a fish room back here, right? It has a very clean, just has
it's
a
a
clean
clean,
smell
it's
to
a
it.
very natural smell. And the one thing about ozone, after it's done doing its job, it dissipates back into water. So there's no residual toxin. There's no toxins to begin with, but once it's done its job, it just turns back in the water, um, which of course is a desirable effect. Um, so we've been using it. We also found that because it knocks down the bacteria and because of the refrigeration, we've gained. We did test early on, and we picked up 2 or 3 days of shelf life on the product. So it actually does add value to the product as well.
For sure. Now that you guys have grown, you said Vegas, Orlando, obviously Philly, you've expanded outside of the Philly market and delivering into ancillary cities around you. You've grown with the company. How challenging is it now to manage a team in different states and different time zones and different needs?
Well, I think that has always been there, especially when you're dealing with a fresh product that you're not you're at the world's mercy, right? We don't produce anything in Philadelphia as far as growing fish, so we have to bring it in from all corners of the planet, literally. So transportation is probably our biggest challenge. Um, as far as managing people, we're very fortunate to have a great group of people that are passionate about what they do because you have to be in the food business, and I think it's doubly difficult to be in seafood, right? Um, everybody knows where you work when you walk out into the general public, right? Or they think you've been fishing or something, or you have a tuna fish sandwich in your pocket. But food business is a tough business. So people that are there because they want to be there. And the thing that's funny about the seafood business is you've got people from all types of different backgrounds. I've got a marine bio background. You have accountants that used to be doing a lot of chefs, a lot of people that are in the food business. There's school teachers that used to, teach. There's it takes there's no single type of person that's in the seafood business. It's people from all different types of backgrounds. But the one thing that do hold as a fact is once you get in the fish business, it's very tough to leave. And I'm an example of that because I've been doing it my whole life, and I've been at Samuel's for 34 years. So I speak from experience.
Yeah, right. I was talking to a group yesterday about being in the food industry. It's just like once it gets in you, you're in it. There's a lot of other ways to make money than the margins in seafood plus I mean the headaches that come with procuring seafood, and you are dealing with an animal that's no longer alive, so you're going to have quality issues. If you're buying a whole fish and you're not checking the cavity, you may clean it, but it
I
could
mean,
be bruised on the inside.
there's a definite timer running.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't
We
get better with age. It's not dry age beef.
Right.
Although they are dry aging, dry age is a big trend right now.
Yeah, and I can't say I'm familiar with it. I understand the concept that you know,
There's
but
a there's one influencer dry age fish guy that he's I'd say he's the main proponent right now doing it, and I forget where he's located, but I did have a chance to try the dry age or a king, and it actually had a very clean flavor. I was expecting kind of the same thing you'd see out of a steak, where it would have a little bit more pungency to it, but
Mm-hmm.
it really, really cleaned out the flavor of it. I was actually shocked. The color stayed beautiful and orange, but interesting to see that people are playing around with seafood in different ways because the American restaurant menu traditionally sees shrimp, scallop, salmon,
Mm-hmm.
halibut if you're lucky, right? Like maybe four skews onto that, and now we see if I were to walk into your seafood room, I'm sure we would see black sea bass and various snapper, all the tuna. The species list is pretty robust. Is
Mm-hmm.
there one or two particular species that you really love that are those sleeper fish?
Um, I don't. It's like asking which one of your children do you love more. I like to see the fish that are that are harvested uh, responsibly. As we talked before, I don't like to see anything over harvested. It can be challenging this time in history with climate change is affecting our business directly. Um, and you're seeing a lot of challenging issues, especially on the West Coast with the wild salmon. That was it was touted as the poster child of sustainability, and in reality, it's the opposite. Uh, Not to anybody's fault, but primarily due to climate change and perhaps some regulatory mistakes. So there are some times that we have to make choices, for the species and maybe back off a little bit. So things like that. I think there's a lot of success stories with the comeback of swordfish. I think swordfish is a fantastic fishery on the East Coast and a delicious product that the stocks are healthy. I think the scallop industry is still doing very well. I mean, it's tough to beat, a truly dry scalp that's fresh off the boat. You don't saute it and a little salt and pepper, and you're off to the races. You don't really have to do much. Um, I think that I think the Atlantic salmon, I think is a success story in its own. I think it's amazing where even though there's some controversy now with some of the production, aquacultured shrimp. I mean, you're going to see shrimp at McDonald's pretty soon, and that's moving away from um, sea raised product into more RAS situations. And RAS is the future of aquaculture for multiple reasons. If anybody truly wants an organic product, it's going to come from RAS, and the variety of species is just expanding, annually. And you see a lot of private equity money going into it. It's just people are a little bit too impatient with the ROI on it because seafood is not something you're going to get rich quick on. It's a long haul, and that's the mistake most of the private entity people think that they're going to turn it around in days. It's not. It's a lot of singles, right? There's no home runs. Um, you're seeing the redfish that's now being raised. It's a delicious product. You're even down to Dover sole and turbo and the Bronzino. And I mean, every year there's more products that are coming from aquaculture, and that I guess is my if I had a favorite, it's anything that's coming out of aquaculture right now because that is the future of the industry, and we should probably be moving away from wild product.
So speaking of aquaculture, those are mostly the branded seafood products that we see within a distributor, and that also, you look at Rappahannock Oysters or Hollywood Oyster Company. Um, how can a vendor that's working with a distributor provide value to where you are a partner? What does that partnership look like for a vendor that's wanting to expand the relationship and just be that go-to for a distributor? What have you seen work?
Um, Well, obviously, the initial thing's going to be the quality of the product. Um, there's no. I mean, that's kind of obvious, right?
Table
If it's
stakes,
if
yeah.
it's not good, you're not going to survive, right? So you have to
Right.
make sure you know what you're doing. But the most important, I mean, all these brands of oysters are crazy, right? It used to be where the product was raised from, and that Blue Point, there was actually a place, Blue Point, where it came from. Now it's all marketing, which is great, right? Because it keeps everybody interested, and that'll continue. But the thing is the scope of availability. They can't have a break in production because once you spend all this time and money growing this product, advertising it, marketing it, producing it, delivering it, if there's a break in production, that's a death sentence because as soon as that happens, you have to start over again. And that's another thing that the aquaculture guys miss. They think they've gone through all this trouble and they've gone through the science and the little bit of art and wiggle room to create this product, and they finally have that market size fish and they hold it up and they say, I'm done. Look, I did it. The world will come to my. That's not the end. That's the beginning. And if you can't produce that fish, 52 weeks a year, at a reasonable price and a high quality and get it there, you'll never be successful. And that's the one thing people miss. So I think that's what they have to learn. And they'll get there. But the science is improved and it's amazing, but it's got a little bit further to go to bring that price down and ensure availability.
If you were starting your career today in selling food, what would you do? How would you build yourself up to be, you know, the next Joe?
Um, it's a good question. I never really actually thought that because I think one's enough for the world, to tell you the truth. Um, but I think with any person, I guess, be a little bit more patient. Um, but the one thing I have learned over the years is you have to anticipate a little bit more and listen. You really got to listen and get, and that's the one thing I think I did because of my passion behind thing, is learn where the product comes from, and how it is raised, how it is harvested, who's harvesting it, and that's the one thing that early on that I could do and I did that maybe other people didn't, was learn about the fishery. And when you buy a fish and it's on the dock, that's over. You got to anticipate, especially with the wild, where it came from and when it's going to be available, so you can be that one step ahead of somebody else. And I think if I could have done that a little better, um, you know, I would probably do that. Other than that, I probably, stay out of the fish business would be my other thing I would tell my future self.
Well, Joe, we're up on time. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and the people that are listening that care about distribution and where food comes from. I'm going to just venture to guess you are a Philadelphia fan of every sort, having
Mm-hmm.
lived there and been born and raised. I'll probably ask this more for my wife. Are you now a Taylor Swift fan because of Travis Kelsey or
Well,
Jason Kelsey?
Jason Kelsey, I don't know. Taylor Swift's all right. She doesn't really bother me too much. Um, she's doing all right for herself. I think she just made the billionaires list, so
She's a
she's
big
doing
seafood
something
eater,
right.
I hear.
Yeah,
She's a big
if she
seafood
if
eater.
if she needs any fish, tell her she can call me. I'll take care of her.
And last, if you've got one game that you can go to in Philly, what sport are you picking?
Well, I've been to one Super Bowl that in Jacksonville. That was a little disappointing. And when we won one a little bit later, then we lost one. But I anticipate the next game in Philadelphia I'll be seeing is the NCAA Division One lacrosse championship that's coming up um, Memorial Day.
Very cool.
Yeah, Denver might be there. Who knows?
Yeah,
They
they have
got
a
a
pretty
pretty
good
good
lax
team.
team. Yeah, yeah. They've got a MLS team that's pretty strong too out here. So, well, Joe, it's been great having you on. I appreciate the time, and people can find Samuels by going to just going to Google, type in Samuels and Sons, and you'll see about them.
Yeah, and Ian, thank you again for inviting me. I enjoyed this. It's always fun to talk about fish. And yes, I mean, if anybody, I don't know if you'll put it on your website, but they can
Yep.
certainly email me if they have any questions about seafood. Um, that's what I do. I talk about fish a lot, so I'd be happy to answer any questions. And thank you again for inviting me. It's been cool.